Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight, we're going to explore the Hebrew language. So specifically, biblical Hebrew or ancient Hebrew. And we'll talk a little bit perhaps about modern Hebrew as well. But mostly the history of the original Hebrew, which is ancient Hebrew or biblical Hebrew, however you want to call it. It's a fascinating language with tremendous depth and meaning on so many levels. We'll soon see how there is tremendous depth in not just in general to the language, but in every aspect of the language. So the sounds that the letters make, the shapes of the letters, the way they're designed, the numerical value of each letter. So each letter has a number. So literally all aspects of the language are fascinating, have a lot of depth and a lot of meaning. So today we're going to try to climb into this world of the Hebrew language and explore some of these layers of depth into the Hebrew language. I would like to spend most of our time together speaking about the language as a whole. So to talk about what all of the letters have in common, and what the entire language as a whole represents. But I also do want to spend some time towards the end speaking about specific letters. We'll start from the beginning. We'll try to do one or two letters to show examples of specific letters, how each individual letter, besides for the depth of the entire language, but to start with some examples, starting with the first couple of letters, to see how also every individual letter has tremendous significance, and there's so much contained within each individual letter. So please feel free to share your comments and questions throughout. I'll try to look at the comments in the chat box as well as the comments on Facebook. I'm going to try to pay attention to what's going on over there as well. Okay. So according to Judaism, according to the Torah, for the first almost 2,000 years of the world's history, to be exact, 1996, in the year 1996, since creation, says the Torah, the entire world, all people spoke just one language. What language was that? It was Hebrew, ancient Hebrew. The Torah talks about how this came about, how this came to be. There was the incident of the Tower of Babel, Tower of Babylonia that was built, extremely high tower. And at that time, up until that time, everybody was speaking the same language. It was only because the people sinned, and we're not going to talk about the whole story now of what their sin was and what it was all about. That's beyond the scope of tonight's discussion. We could save that for another time. But from the time that the people sinned, God decided to change the languages of the people. And so he caused all of the people to speak 70 different languages. So from one language, it went to 70 different languages. And this also caused people to spread apart geographically to different regions, just because now they spoke different languages. It was easier for them to live further apart, perhaps. So the Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters, and it is used for more than just one language. Of course, it's used for ancient Hebrew, and of course, it's also used for modern Hebrew. Modern Hebrew is, in a way, a language for itself. It's quite different than ancient Hebrew, but of course, it's based on ancient Hebrew. Most of it is taken from there and just a little bit more modern. So of course, the modern Hebrew also uses the same Hebrew alphabet, but not only modern Hebrew, but also Aramaic, at least Jewish Aramaic, the way it is in the Talmud. It's the language of Aramaic, and it's written in Hebrew letters as well. And also the Yiddish language. The Yiddish language, the Yiddish language was spoken by Jews mostly in Eastern Europe. I don't know exactly how old the language is, maybe a few hundred years, maybe a little bit more. So this is considered to be a Jewish language as well, and it is the Hebrew alphabet which is used for this language as well. Now back to the Hebrew language, or ancient Hebrew. Even going back a very long time ago, even going back to ancient times, there were always, from way back, there were various dialects, so different accents. And the most famous difference in accent is going to be between the Sephardic communities and the Ashkenazi communities. So the communities that originated in Spain and France, modern Hebrew mostly follows the Sephardic accent. But in fact, even though they could sound quite different, in fact, it's of course the same language. And especially when it's written, you see how they're exactly the same language. And even if you just understand a few rules of what's changed, you see right away that it's exactly the same language. I'd like to talk about, so this is some basic information about the language. I'd like to get a little bit deeper now, and it's going to get a little bit Kabbalistic, because the Kabbalah talks about how there is, in fact, a fundamental difference between the Hebrew language and every other language that there is in the world, that there was in the world in the past, and that there is in the world today. And the difference is that all languages, the words that are chosen for whatever things and objects we're talking about, words are only agreed upon words so that people could understand what is being spoken about. So, two people get together to write a language, or more than two get together to write a language, and this is called a table, because we need to know we need to know that we're talking about a table. This is called Zoom. We need to know what we're talking about. We need to know where to come to the same place. So it's just a word that both of us understand. We agreed that this piece of wood should be called a table, so we know what to talk about. But there is actually no essential connection between the word and the object. Okay, so there's nothing special about the word. It's just what we agreed upon. Now, the Hebrew language is completely different, because according to the Kabbalah, the Hebrew word for whatever object it is that we're talking about, the Hebrew word is actually the essence of the object and the very life force that's keeping it in existence. So the word is not just a word to know what is it that we're talking about, but the word, the words and the letters, the Hebrew letters, is actually the life force of the object, of whatever it might be. Now, this is a big concept in the Kabbalah, so let's explore it a little bit more deeply. The Torah says that the world was created with 10 statements. Let there be light, let there be animals, let there be 10 different statements. Now, these 10 statements are the actual life force behind each creation and each object, and these statements, these letters, these words is what keeps it alive and what keeps it in existence. So it's the continuous life force. Just like a person has to have a constant life force in order to stay alive, right? So if your soul leaves you, then the person passes away, even if all of their organs are complete. Your phone could be fully complete, but it needs the battery. The battery has to be recharged. And the same thing is with all of creation, says the Kabbalah. Creation is not just something that happened once, but it needs to have a life force that keeps it going. So it's not enough that it was created. It has to be kept going like a battery, like a soul. Now, the 10 statements, the letters of the Hebrew language, this was all said in Hebrew, these letters are the life force. Now, the same is true with people. The life force, what is the life force of a person? The soul. So the name of a person is actually the name of their core, and it's actually the name of their soul. And like we said before, it's the soul that keeps the person alive. It's the soul that keeps the person, breathing and alive. And so therefore, your name is not just random, but your name is actually a very deep part of who you are. Now, how was your name chosen then? It does seem that names are random. Who chooses the names? Parents choose the names. We just choose the name that we like, don't we? But the fact is, tradition has it that parents have a small prophecy when they're naming their baby. So the idea behind this is, because the name is so essential to who you are, because the name is your actual is the name of your soul, and it's the name of your core, and it's part of who you are in your essence. So it makes sense that it needs to be with a certain, at least a small type of prophecy. We're not aware of this prophecy. It's, we think that we came up with the name, but in fact it is divinely inspired, and we sort of know, at least at the end, which name to choose, and that's the name, according to the tradition. This is the name that everyone gets. Now, just to illustrate this point, to give an example of where we actually see this in real life. Somebody faints. So I've never seen them do this, but apparently the first thing that they do to try to wake up the person, what do? They call their name into their ear. Why do they do that? So the reason is because, like we said, because the name is so connected to a person, because it's such a deep part of you. So it's possible that by calling the name, you could wake up the person. So it's not about screaming the name and shocking them. It's not about making a loud noise, and you could say anything. It's about saying the person's name into their ear, because the name is so much a part, so deeply a part of you. So it's very possible that that by calling the name, it could wake up the person. It could wake up their soul, and apparently this works. So this is an illustration of this idea. Now back to the life force of a person, which is the soul. If you think about it for a moment, how is it that the body and soul work together? If you think about it, they're not really compatible, because a body is physical, of course, and a soul is the most spiritual thing. So how could they work together? How could the body contain the soul? They have nothing really. They don't have any real compatibility. So how does it work? How does the soul stay in the body? The battery of your phone is is a piece of metal or a piece of plastic, just like your phone, and they're made to, to fit one into another. But the soul is made up of something completely different. It's a spiritual it's a spiritual creation. It's a spiritual thing. How is that contained in a body? The answer is, again, back to the name. The name and the words and the letters of your name is what makes the connection between the body and the soul. So again, the name is the name of your soul. So your soul has a name. What's your soul's name? Your name, your Jewish name. So that's your essence. That's who you are. That's the deepest part of you. But also, the letters serve as this connection between the body and the soul, just like the letters and the words of the 10 statements are the life force of the of everything, of all objects. When it comes to a person, the name is the name is not actually the life force. It's the soul that's the life force, but it's actually the name also, because the name is the soul, right? This is the soul's name. But also the name is serving as this connection, as this conduit, if you will, between the soul and the body. So it's like the adapter that connects the body and the soul. Now, one interesting custom, an interesting Jewish custom that you might be familiar with, which is another example of this whole idea, is that when somebody, God forbid, is very ill, something that family or community might do is add a Jewish name. And this is done at a small ceremony at the Torah. So it's like an official and binding thing. So what is the reason why they would add a name to the soul? What's the reason why they would add a name to a person? What's the point? What are they trying to accomplish? The answer is, like we were saying before, that the name is so much the character, or part of the character of the person, so that if someone gets a new name, that kind of could bring them a new mazal. A mazal is the Hebrew word for the subconscious levels of the soul. So by adding a new name, in a way, you're adding certain character, or perhaps changing the character of the person, at least on some level. And the person, in a way, becomes a new person. And that way, hopefully, if something bad was supposed to happen to them, hopefully with this new mazal, hopefully with this new part of them, they could be cured, and they could become better. Now, very typically, they'll add the name Chaim for a male, or the name Chaya for a female, which both of them mean life. So adding the name life will hopefully give them a long life. Now, this is not just it's not just saying, okay, it's not just like a hope and a wish that they become, that they live a long life and that they get out of this illness. Of course, it's that as well, but it's because of this understanding of the Kabbalah, of the importance of name, and how much it's a part of the character and the soul. That is the reason why this custom is very often done, because of what the name actually is, because of what the name stands for. Okay, any questions or comments on this section, on this idea, the Kabbalah? This is probably the most Kabbalistic part of the discussion. So if this was a little bit above your head, the next part is going to get back to a little bit closer to this world. Let's see if there's anything on Facebook. Okay, I say hello, Heather. I want to give Heather a thank you for inspiring this topic. Hello, Telma. Hello, Erna. Hello, Shandel. Okay, got some people on Facebook. Anybody have any comments or questions? Please let me know before we move on. Okay, I'm sure you heard the term before, the holy language or the holy tongue. And that's a reference, of course, to the Hebrew language. It's considered to be a holy language. Now we don't hear that about any other language, at least not that I'm aware of. So what is the reason? Why is it called the holy language, the holy tongue? So there are different commentaries and different reasons given, and I'll give you some of them. Hebrew is, at least ancient Hebrew, is inherently holy because it is the language that God used to communicate the Ten Commandments and the Torah on Mount Sinai. So this is a very powerful thing, and it's also the way God communicated with the prophets. It was in the Hebrew language. Also, the names of God are in the Hebrew language, and not only the names of God, but also the names of angels. So all of these things are all with Hebrew letters in the Hebrew language, and I guess it's because of this and in honor of this, or thanks to this, that Hebrew is considered to be a holy language, because I guess it's used for from the very beginning. It's used for very holy purposes. God communicating, God's names, and the names of the angels who are spiritual and holy as well. Another point, another idea is, as you probably know, Hebrew is not the only language, but Hebrew is a language that is written from right to left. Why is it so? Why is Hebrew written from right to left? So there are some practical reasons, I think, connected to the way that they would engrave letters into stone. In the olden days, they would use a hammer and a chisel. So I think they would hold the chisel with their right hand. I might be confusing it. Somehow the way they would write on stone or engrave in stone, it was easier for them to go from right to left. Now, I've never tried this, I'll be honest with you, so I can't tell you for sure, but apparently it's easier to write it from right to left. Now, just like in all aspects of the Hebrew language, there's going to be deep significance and deep meaning. The same is true also with this idea that Hebrew is written from right to left. There's also not just a practical reason, but there's also a deeper reason. The deeper reason is that the right side represents the attribute of kindness. So if you studied even a little bit of Kabbalah, you'll know this, that the right side is very much connected to kindness, as opposed to the left side, which represents the attribute of severity or strictness or awe. The right side is kindness, love, giving, all of that. So the idea is that when we have to choose which side to start writing with, we're gonna try to choose the right side because of what it represents. It represents giving, kindness, love, and just lots of good things. And this is also a lesson for us in our lives, that whenever it comes to a situation, and there's always more than one way to approach a situation, how to deal with the situation. So we should always try to, the first approach that we try should be with kindness. Always take a step of being kind, of being loving, a positive word. So even in difficult situations when it might seem like this is not going to be effective, but this teaches us that we should at least try to start first with the kindness and with love. Okay, I'm still looking out for questions in case anybody has. I'm looking at the chat box on the Zoom and also on Facebook. Okay. Let's talk about the vowels a little bit, vowels of the Hebrew language. So there are 22 letters, like we mentioned before, 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and they're all consonants. So none of the letters serve as vowels. So how do you read the Hebrew? How does it work? How do you make sense of the letters? So there's a system of vowels, and it looks like dots and lines, which kind of surround the letters. Some of them go beneath the letter, some of them go above the letter, and sometimes here and there you could see a vowel, or at least a symbol in the middle of the letter. So they're kind of all around the letters, all around the words. Now if you look at very basic Hebrew texts, like a prayer book, like a Torah, a Chumash, the first 5 books of Moses, sometimes the whole Tanakh, all the 24 books. So all of the basic texts, it's most likely that you'll see the vowels printed together with the letters. But actually, most of Hebrew literature and Jewish literature are going to be just the letters without the vowels. So how do you read it? How does it work? So the answer is pretty much it's like riding a bike without training wheels. So if you're riding with the training wheels, you don't understand how we can do it. How are we going to do without the wheels on the side? But the fact is that with a little bit of practice, it becomes very easy, and it becomes second nature. And the same thing as Hebrew reading. Once you get the hang of it, once you have experience with the Hebrew language, it's quite you pick it up, and then it becomes quite easy to read it without the vowels, right? So if you're going to look at the Talmud, you can look at the Mishnah. If you look at most of Hebrew literature, Jewish literature, you're going to find that the books are just the letters without the vowels. Now, you don't have the vowels included in the written Torah. You're not going to find it in the Torah scroll. You're not going to find it on the parchment. You're also not going to find it within the text. The text is not going to talk about the vowels. The vowels are a part of the oral tradition. So the vowels are part of the tradition, and they are divine. The vowels were given with the Torah from God, just like the letters were, just like the Hebrew language was, together with the Torah. It came with a language, and it came with vowels. So even though the vowels are not included in the text, but of course you must have the vowels to read the text and to understand the text. So this is included in the oral tradition. And so when they got the Torah at the beginning, it was written the way we have it written on parchment today, without the vowels. But they were taught, the Jewish people were taught what the vowels were and where they belong, and how to read the Hebrew. So this is how it was kind of kept, just like the oral tradition passed down from one generation to the next, from teacher to student, parent to child, and so on. It was only in a much later generation, in the time of the Great Assembly, the Anshe Knesset Hagadola, that there was a great sage and a great scholar. His name was Ezra, the scribe. He was born in the year, see what I wrote down here. He was born in the year 313 BCE. He eventually became the head of the Anshe Knesset Hagadola. He became the head of the men of the Great Assembly. These were the leaders of the Jewish people at the time, and he was the one who recorded the vowels. He was the one who wrote it down. So finally became something that was, you know, I don't know if I could say printed because there was no printing, but it was published in whatever way things could be published in those days. It was finally written down after all of that time. Okay, so that is pretty much some background information and some secrets, if you will, about the Hebrew language as a whole. So we had some ideas from the Kabbalah, what the letters represent, the life force, and we talked about how the language is holy. We talked about the vowels. We talked about the name of a person. So this is all a lot of things that are relevant and apply to all parts of the Hebrew language. I'd like to now, as promised, take some time to look at the first two letters of the Hebrew alphabet and to show and to discuss how each individual letter also has a tremendous meaning and tremendous depth. Unless somebody has some question or comment first. Okay. Okay, so the first letter that we have is the letter Aleph. And I'm going to share my screen so that we could talk about the letter and you could see what we're talking about. Not just hear about it, but also see it. So I'm going to click share screen. Let me see which screen it is that I'm sharing. Here we go. Let me see if we're getting the right screen up there. Do you guys see anything?
Yes.
Do you see the purple Aleph?
Yes.
Okay, so we're doing good. Okay, so the Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's called Aleph, and it has three sections, as you can see. It has the little piece on the top, small piece on the top. It has the small piece on the bottom, and it has this line, this big line in the middle that connects the top part and the bottom part. So this is the Aleph. This is the design, at least in the block letters. There's also a script writing, and there are also Rashi letters. So there are different fonts, you might call them fonts. But this is the original letter. Now, Aleph kind of sounds like the letter A, so it makes that kind of a sound. So, like for example, my name, Avraham, it starts with the Aleph, so very similar to the letter A. So this letter has three sections, and each section represents something. And this is very interesting because the small piece at the top, on the top right, that represents God. Why does it represent God? Because God is above and beyond our comprehension. So that's why it's at the top. It's a small piece at the top. Now, in comparison to who God truly is in his essence, our understanding of him is like nothing. So because God is way beyond us, we almost our understanding of him is almost like nothing. So that's why the piece that represents God is both at the top and also it's small. It's a smaller, at least on the bigger section, because our understanding of God is very small. We have a very small, limited understanding of what God is and who God is. Okay, now we'll skip the middle for a second, and we'll look at the bottom the bottom piece. On the left side, left bottom, we have this piece represents the person. And the idea is that the only way that a person could have any understanding of God and any grasp of God's wisdom is only by being humble. So if somebody is humble and they understand, who they are and where they're coming from and how great God is, then it's possible to understand at least whatever is possible for the human being to understand. If someone is humble, that then they could reach that level of comprehension, that level of understanding. So that's why it's both at the bottom and it's small, because that represents humility, to realize that you're not great enough to understand everything about God. God is infinite. God is the Almighty, and it's important to have that, to realize that, to have that understanding in order to learn something about what God is and what He's all about. Now, what is the section in the middle? This big section that connects God and the person, so to speak. So this piece in the middle represents the Torah. So that's because the Torah is what unites God and the person, right? So we're finite beings, we're limited human beings, and God is way beyond us, and God is totally above us and unlimited. How could we connect to Him? So the answer is through the Torah, which is God's wisdom, we are able to connect to God. Now, this section it also represents in general the unity between humankind and God. So there is a way to connect. There is a connection between us and God, and so it's this middle section that represents this unity between a Jew and God, this unity between all of humankind and God. Let me just see what question we have here from Heather. Is it a mitzvah to learn Hebrew? That's a great question. The answer is that as important as Hebrew is extremely important. So if you look at the prayer book, if you look at the Torah, it's all, of course, in Hebrew. The most famous prayers and the most powerful words that Jewish people have said throughout history, it was all in the original Hebrew. So, of course, the Hebrew is extremely important. But that said, even though Hebrew is so important, it is equally important to understand what we're saying. So if somebody is going to pray and they have a choice to either pray in Hebrew or to pray in the language that they understand, it's preferable to pray in English so that they can understand, because prayer, of course, learning you need to understand, but even prayer, which is something that you're saying to God, really it's a conversation between you and God, and really it's words that come from the heart and words that you're supposed to connect with. So of course that has to be in the language that you understand. Now certain things are much better said in Hebrew. For example, Shema Yisrael, which is the most famous prayer in all of Judaism. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one, the Lord is our God, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. So some things like this, it's very, very special to say it in the Hebrew, but of course we should always make sure that we understand it as well. So should we learn Hebrew? The answer is yes. That is the key to so much of Judaism: prayer, learning, understanding Torah. So Hebrew is very important to learn, but at the same time, if somebody does not know Hebrew yet, comes time to say a prayer, or comes time to a prayer, even if it's very important. Of course, it should be said in English, because that's how you have a conversation, language you understand, and that's how you speak from your heart. It has to really connect to you and come from your heart. So that is the answer to your question. Okay, so I just want to bring one more idea. I'm going to bring back my screen here. Okay, just going to share one more idea about the Aleph, which we mentioned quickly before in passing. But now we're going to talk about it because we're dealing with an individual example and an individual letter. And that is the numerical value. Okay, so every letter has a number that is associated with that particular letter. And so the first letter is Aleph. That's letter number 1. The second letter is Bet or Bays. That's the number 2. Now, when you get to number 10, then it jumps 10 at a time, 10, 20, 30. And when it gets to the hundreds, it jumps 100 at a time. So the first letter is going to be a number 1. The last letter, which is a Taf, is going to be 400, because at that point it's already in the hundreds. So letters could be 1 digit, 2 digits, or 3 digits, but each one has a number, and the number is significant. The number has special meaning. There are commentaries. For example, the Kli Yakar, who's very famous commentary, he often gives commentary according to the number of words. So you take a whole word, you add up each letter, and there could be a whole commentary and a whole explanation based on the number of a certain letter, or the number of a combination of letters, or a word, or a combination of words. So it's a very fascinating part of the Hebrew language, which is called gematria. So that is, gematria means the numerical value. So what is the numerical value of Aleph? So we already know the numerical value is 1. But what does 1 represent? So this is probably an easy one. The number 1 represents God, because God is the one God and God is the only God. So like we say in the Shema that we referenced before, in the Shema prayer, which is probably the most famous prayer in all of Judaism, it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." The Lord is one. So we're saying that the letter Aleph represents actually God himself, because this is the number 1 and God is one. Now on a more Kabbalistic level, it's not just that God is one and there is only one God. So again, it's not just that there is only one God as opposed to two gods or multiple gods. Saying that God is one also means that he is the only one. What do I mean by that? What does the Kabbalah mean by that? That he is the only true existence. So that means that everything in essence and everything at the core is an expression of God. How so? Because God created it. God continues to keep it in existence by giving it a life force and keeping it going, keeping the battery recharged. And also there is a certain purpose that it was created for. So in essence, everything is God. It's not only that there is one God, but there is only one being. Everything is God. And you just have to remove some of the external layers to discover how there's a soul, and there's a core, there's an essence, and there's an essential purpose, and there's a goal for this thing. That's why it was created. So according to the Kabbalah, saying that God is one, saying that the Lord is one, is not just that there are not. That's not just negating that there are two gods or multiple gods, but it's also saying how in essence the entire world is all an expression of the one God. Okay, so that is the first letter. And I think we have time for one more letter. We have one more letter for the second letter, unless anyone has any questions or comments about this first one. Yes, Paul, please go ahead.
When I look at the letter, I see that the small part on the top and the small part on the bottom are not just straight lines. So it's not like a matter of man receiving the word of God and just going off in his own direction. It looks like it curves around to a certain extent, and we can, follow it through, and that it looks like it's based on a reciprocal relationship between God and man.
Right.
So that is in that, in the way it's written. So that, that's what it looks like it represents, or that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to use the word of God and putting into practice establishes a reciprocal relationship between us and God.
Right. That is definitely correct. Very accurate. Okay, well said. Moving right along to the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And again, I would like to share my screen so we could talk about the letter while seeing it. Okay, share screen. Can everybody see the screen? Okay, I think it's still on the Aleph. Here is the second letter. This is the letter Bet or Beis, depending on the accent. The letter Bet is a very interesting letter. It's also made of 3 parts, but quite different to the Aleph, as you can see. And these 3 lines, and these 3 sections actually represent 3 directions. So it represents the east, south, and the west. Okay, I know we're up in the north. We didn't forget about the north. We'll talk about that in just a second. We'll see how this letter is very much connected to Iceland. But in the meantime, we only have 3 letters. We only have 3 directions. We have the east, south, and west. And it starts at the top. The top line represents the east. The next line going down represents the south, and the line beneath the line at the bottom represents the west. This is perhaps what I think one explanation is that this is kind of like the path of the sun. It rises in the east, and then it sets in the west. So it rises at the top. Top is the east, and then it sets when it's going down. That is the bottom of the letter. That's the west. The Medrash says something fascinating, and I find it especially interesting because we live in Iceland. And what Medrash says is that the letter Beis is very similar, and in a way represents the structure of the world. Okay, how so? If you look at the earth, there's land on the east, there's land on the west, and there's land even in the south. So even when you go to the South Pole, you go beneath the ice, there is in fact land. There is Antarctica. So even in the south, at the pole, there's land. But if you go way up north, all the way to the pole, the North Pole, even if you can get beneath the frozen mass of whatever ice is there, there's nothing beneath it. There's no land mass beneath the at the North Pole. Correct me if I'm wrong. I got this from the Medrash. I never checked myself, but apparently this is exactly how it is. Now, so this is exactly the letter Beis, right? So the north side of the Beis, normally north is at the top of the map, But in this case, east is at the top of the letter, like we talked before. So the top is the east, side is the south, the bottom is the west, the left side is the north, and that's left completely open, just like the structure of the world. You have land on all, in all three directions, except for in the north. So we're in Iceland, so there's land in the north, but the North Pole at the very top, this is open. This is empty. So the world is kind of open at the top. So it kind of feels like that sometimes in Iceland. We have all of this, we have these storms coming. Who knows where it's coming from? But the letter Beis represents the north. Well, I'm sorry, the opening of the letter Beis represents the north. And what the Medrash says, something very fascinating, is that the world was kept open at the top. And in a way, if we could say this, the world, the northern part of the world, the top of the world, is incomplete, right? So you have land everywhere else, but there you don't have land. So in a certain way, if we could say this, the world is incomplete and was not completed at the top. And the lesson for this is that the world was in fact created imperfect. The world was in fact created incomplete. And this is our job, not to bring sandbags to the North Pole and to create an island there, but on a spiritual level, to make the world more perfect and more complete. And so that means by making the world a kinder place, making the world a better place, and making the world a more godly place. So that's our job. So the world was in a way built and constructed incomplete in a physical sense, that the top was left open. And in a way, the Medrash says this teaches us a certain lesson, that the world is our job to perfect, and our job to complete, to make it perfect, a better, kinder, and more godly place. Okay, so that is the design of the letter Bet. I'm going to turn off the screen sharing for a moment. So and then we'll talk about, the last thing we'll talk about is the gematria, the numerical value of the second letter. Let me just see if there's any questions here on Facebook. Okay, I think we're good. So what is the numerical value of the second letter, the letter Bet? It's number 2, right? The second letter, number 2. What does the number 2 represent? So 2 represents how everything in the world was created in pairs, okay? So like a man and a woman, male and female, animals, most things or many things were created in pairs. Now this division, how things are in pairs and things are in sets of 2, teaches us that God is one, and only God is one. And God is the only one who could create the way he creates as one. For us, for humankind, or for animals, or to recreate and to reproduce, we need to be 2 together. So two people are required. So this shows us something about God, how God is one. God creates. For us to create, we need 2 together. So that's one idea. Another idea is Beis is the second letter. It represents intellect. Intellect, in contrast to the Aleph, the first letter, which represents faith. Okay. Now why is intellect number 2 and faith number 1? What's the reason for that? It represents two layers of the relationship that we have with the Torah, with God's Torah. First, first there needs to be a certain faith. There has to be a certain belief that the Torah is divine, that the Torah comes from God. And after that, the second layer, the second aspect of the relationship with the Torah is, of course, learning, understanding, so an intellectual relationship. Now, how does the Torah begin? What is the first letter of the first word of the Torah? So you might think that it should start with the first letter, Aleph, but in fact it does not. It begins with the second letter, Bet. And the reason for that is it's a certain hint. It's hinting to a certain lesson that in order to properly study the Torah, in order to properly and fully understand the Torah, you need to first have the understanding that the Torah is divine and that the Torah is from God. So why does the Torah begin with the second letter, not the first? Because if someone does not believe that the Torah is in fact divine, there's no way that they could fully understand and comprehend, the godly ideas that are expressed in the Torah. But of course, it has two levels: the relationship with the Torah. So it's both the faith and understanding, and we spend most of our time studying it on an intellectual level. But of course, this has to have the foundation of this faith that that the Torah is not just any book, but it's actually the book of God, and it's a holy book. It's godly. Hopefully we'll understand all of it. Hopefully we'll understand most of it, but certain things could be beyond us, and that kind of makes sense because it is written by God. So we have the Aleph is the number 1 that represents the faith, and then the Bet is number 2 that represents the intellect, the understanding, and the study of the Torah. Okay, so here you have it. We have 2 letters. We talked about what they represent. We talked about the designs. We talked about the number, the numerical value, what they represent. And in the beginning, we also talked about, in general, the secrets of the language as a whole, different ideas of the language, how it's a holy language, how the words are really forces of life, and what keeps things in existence. So we had all kinds of very interesting things from the Kabbalah, from other commentaries, from other places, from the Torah. So this is the secrets of some of the secrets of the Hebrew language. Hopefully, if we are able to, we could continue this series, look at some other letters, look at some other messages and secrets of the Torah. Hopefully we'll be able to do that if there is interest, and this brings to a close these secrets of the Hebrew language.
Thank you. I must go.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your insight. Good to see you.
Good to see you, everybody.